Hey guys, welcome to art class. Today we're going to be talking about New York City, and we're talking about that because this whole year we've been studying different parts of America, American artists, American landmarks, different historical events and people. And I wanted to do a kind of cityscape based on New York, and so I found this skyscraper lined design drawing. And it's based off of a New York artist named Mars Jr. He's a current artist. His work is really cool. He went to the Savannah College of Architecture and Design in Savannah, Georgia. And he has worked with Marvel and DC Comics. He does, I think he's involved in animation, but he's done lots of drawings of famous cities and a lot of New York buildings. Now, his drawings, a lot of them have really bright colors. They have kind of like pop culture references. They're also kind of labeled retro styled. So here we're going to make some simple line drawings that have repetition in them of kind of style elements for our buildings and also a repetition of all the windows. And we're just going to make some simple drawings on whatever paper you have. I made mine on colored paper. Your packet that you got or the link I put in Google Classroom has us drawing on colored paper, and originally that's what we would be doing, but I've had a really hard time finding big pieces of colored paper during this time. I can't find them at the store. So I have these little pieces of colored paper, and so what I decided to do, the project calls for using a large sheet of colored paper and taking white paper and drawing buildings on it. But I had big sheets of black paper left over from art class this year. So I decided to take my small sheets of colored paper and draw my buildings on those and then cut them out and glue them to black paper. You can do any type of variation. If you don't have any types of colored paper, you can just draw all of this on white paper if you want. A lot of Mars Jr.'s paintings do have just plain white or solid colored buildings, and then a bright background, a bright sky background. So the idea is that you're not coloring your building a bunch of different colors. It's kind of focusing on the lines and the repeating elements of the architecture and the windows. So you don't have to worry about coloring your buildings in. You're more focused on just the drawing details of the project. So that a lot of you will like that. So the supplies are super simple. Just the paper you're going to draw your buildings on. If you have the colored paper, that will make it look cool. My girls had the idea to use colored poster board, like a neon poster board. And I wish I would have thought of that first because I made this before they thought of that idea. That's what they're going to do theirs on. And it's just Sharpies. I used a fine point and a regular point Sharpie, a ruler for part of it, but not all of it. Eraser, pencil, and then just some scissors and glue if you're making your buildings on separate sheets of paper. Now, this drawing is super simple. I want you to use a ruler if you want to. You don't have to on making the first or the surrounding buildings, the buildings on the edges. Right here, I have two buildings. They're not particular buildings in New York City. They're just two skyscrapers that I've drawn, and I've tried to draw them so that they look 3D. I've done that by making them have edges. The buildings have edges. You can see the edge of the building, and you can also see the windows are all angled according to the line of the roof. And I've created depth because I've put two buildings, one in front and one have kind of staggered behind it. And that was super simple. I just did that with a ruler, and you can use a ruler for this. I did it with a ruler, put my ruler down on my paper, and just drew lines, two straight lines, and then an angled line for my roof, for the edge of my building. And then I drew a straight line across from that to kind of make the face of the building. So here I've drawn two already. And I drew a little building peeking out from behind. So just drew a little straight line and then a straight vertical line down and then an angled line for my roof. Now, the key to making this look 3D is that if you make your windows following the same angle of your roof. Now, if you look at Mars Jr.'s, if you look at his design, a lot of his windows that he's drawn are not exact. So for the windows, I don't want you to use a ruler. I did not use a ruler. That's why some of mine are kind of slanted or don't look perfectly exact. He, in a lot of his paintings, a lot of his windows are not equal. They don't look to have been measured out perfectly. So that should free you from being super intimidated by this project. If you just want to use a ruler to draw kind of like the straight edges of the outside of your building, then you can eyeball the rest of it and try to get it as close as you can. But I don't want you to stress out about making it look perfect, because if you look through his city buildings, they are not perfect. The windows definitely aren't either. And that looks cool about them. Now, I want you to think about some of the buildings in New York City. I did the Chrysler Building because Mars Jr. does a few paintings. He has an acrylic, an ink on acrylic of the Chrysler Building in New York City. Some other ones that you could possibly do are like the Flatiron Building in New York City. You could do the Empire State Building, the Trump Tower. You could investigate into different types of buildings you would like to do. The Chrysler Building that I did in the middle is different than the other surrounding buildings. Okay, and in your drawing guide, there is a picture of the Chrysler Building. And there's also a picture of Mars Jr.'s ink on paper of the Chrysler Building. And I want you to look at that, because I want you to notice how all the windows are different. They're not the same, and they're not perfectly even and straight. So that should encourage you to have fun with this and not worry that everything's exactly the same. So there's a picture of that attached in your drawing guide. And then this particular view of the Chrysler Building is straight on. So you're not going to see the edges of it. You're just going to see the front of the building. And that's how I want you to draw it, if you choose to draw the Chrysler Building. Of course, you could draw another iconic building of New York City if you would like. Now, after I drew this, drew my little skyscrapers next to, and then the Chrysler Building in the middle, and glued that all together, I started thinking as I was looking about it what I could have done to make it more interesting. And if I would do it again, I think that I would draw a blimp floating in the air and put it hanging out over here, or maybe I would draw the moon using that bright colored paper and kind of make some of would take my Sharpie and make some Maria and the moon, the rough places, the mountains and the moon. Something to give my sky some visual interest. Because Mars Jr. does work with comic companies like Marvel and DC, it might be cool if you added some type of nod to that. Somewhere in here you could do a superhero flying through the sky. Maybe you could do one standing on top of one of these skyscrapers. Maybe you could do some signs. That's an idea. You could do a sign on top of a building or a flag on top, something like that. But in this project, I don't want you to color your building a bunch of different colors, because that's not how his buildings are. I want you to, kind of like the beauty of this project is the black ink against the paper with all of these lines of windows and angles of buildings. That's what kind of makes his art stand out. So I want you to try to not color the whole building. Let the lines and repeating elements you've created speak for itself and be the thing that draws your eye in this picture. I hope you enjoy this project. It was a lot of fun making it, and there's a lot of room for creativity here because you don't have to worry about everything being perfectly straight. Thank you guys for joining me. See you next time.